Okay, well, hello everyone. Thank you so much for joining me for this session. Where I want to show you how music is another one of those little jigsaw piece puzzles that form the whole picture that is Anne Lister and her life. Perhaps I should start by telling you just what led me to Anne's music books and why I think they're so important. My career has been as a classical pianist, teaching at Southampton University for 11 years, but mainly freelancing as a performer and accompanist. But in 2012, I bought a Regency period square piano and started researching domestic music making of that era. Over COVID lockdowns, when all the other work had dried up, I was fortunate enough to get an Arts Council grant to fund a project exploring the music books owned by Jane Austen and her female relations. And I recreated costume performances of this material, which we turned into bite-sized documentaries and a CD. Now, I was just starting to think about where to take this research next when, on a visit to Shibden Hall, I struck gold. There, in a glass cabinet, were these 2 volumes of sheet music owned by Anne. And I knew from experience that the potential they held for unlocking insights into her character, her influences, and her motivations was vast. Now, fortunately, Richard McFarlane, who's manager of Shibden Hall and Bankfield Museum, thought the same, and he'd long felt that in a museum setting, these books are dead objects. They can't tell us anything. So he sought funding from Calderdale Council to allow me to bring the books to life. So the research phase is ongoing until November, when, along with soprano Verity Joy, I'll have Shibden Hall to myself for the weekend to make some recordings of these pieces using the Savile Room, where Anne herself probably performed music. So I'm going to take my 1826 Broadwood square piano that you see down there in the left to give authenticity to the production. It's the sort of instrument designed for that type of setting. We know there was a harpsichord at Shibden at one point because Aunt Anne played the harpsichord, and also a piano, but we're not sure what type of instruments they were. So if anyone's researching the financial side of Shibden Hall and come across receipts, do let me know. But the videos that we make there are going to be made into bite-sized documentaries again for use at the museums, and also a CD. Now, in the outline for this talk, I described the volumes as being like Anne's Spotify playlist. And I wasn't just trying to put a modern spin on the material, because they are literally the historical equivalent. They aren't ready-made collections bought from a shop, but they're individual sheets that Anne would have selected, bought, and then had bound. So let's have a look in the front covers, the fly leaves of each of these. One's 1806, the other's 1807, and both are signed by Anne. But that little green label you see there is the binder's mark, Garlic Bookseller, binder and stationer, Old Market Street, Halifax. So we know where that one was bound, but not the other one. As music wasn't cheap, we know that these were clearly favourite pieces. And nowadays we're bombarded with music, aren't we, wherever we go? But in Anne's time, the only way to access this sort of entertainment was to go to a public concert. And these were much less common than now, although York was the metropolis of the north and there would have been a lot of opportunity there. You could go to church, obviously, and hear the choir and the organ, which we know Anne loved. And the theatre, of course, was a major source of material, but primarily you would make the music yourself. Or more specifically, if you were a woman, you would make the music yourself as part of your homemaking duties. Now, you're expected to be accomplished, and that, amongst a million other things, included playing an instrument. So the reason you would go to all this trouble is to compete for a husband, which brings up the first fascinating thing about the collection. what was Anne's motivation for creating it. It certainly wasn't for husband baiting, but it does seem that she was a musical child. I've got a letter here from Rebecca Lister, Christmas Eve, 1799, and it describes Anne, aged 8, and her mother is talking about her winning a prize for writing. That's not unexpected. But later on in the letter, she explains that the dancing master, Mr. Noak, says that he honoured me with a public day, that I might see how much she excelled in dancing. And indeed, she does dance in the most elegant style I ever recollect seeing one of her age dance in my life. Now, that could be a mother boasting about her daughter, obviously, but it does conjure up a slightly different picture to the slightly ungainly Anne that we see in Gentleman Jack striding across the ballroom. Anne herself preferred music to dancing, she says in a letter to Aunt Anne. But even in 1803, aged about 12, we discover she's already pretty accomplished. At the end of another letter to her aunt, Anne's mother says the following: on Sunday next, she is to play the organ. It's certainly a charitable act, as the young man is under a penalty of £40 unless he procures somebody to play for him in his absence. So there we have 12-year-old Anne performing in public in a sort of semi-professional way. Now, the majority of the music in this Lister collection is piano music, and it's been fascinating to look at all the pencil markings, the pencil notations within the music. I've put some here in this slide, but it's absolutely filled with pencil notations. And also you find bits of foliage, which who knows how they got there, but it's an interesting sort of personal find. So all of these pencil markings give us an idea of which pieces she played most, but they also show how good a player she was. In the process of learning the pieces for the performances, I've quietly thanked her for all this preparation work that she's done, and very intelligently it's been worked out too, but then I guess we would expect nothing less. There are pieces of great difficulty and flamboyance here. Again, we might expect that. But I wanted to share with you one movement from a piece that illustrates perhaps a different side to her character. It needs sensitivity and perhaps stillness, whilst communicating quite deep feeling. It's only short, but I'll play it to you, and it's a bit of a different insight, I think, into her. So what's happening in 1806 and 1807 to prompt Anne to put these volumes together? If it's not a desire to become marriageable, then this passion for music must have deeper roots. Is it an intellectual pursuit? Maybe. But I think the answer is intrinsically tied up with Eliza Raine. And my guess is that music is a distraction and an emotional outlet at a time of passion and separation. Anne, at this point, had just experienced her first profound connection with another girl and a first taste of love and intimacy. So it was an intense relationship, as we know, the two 13-year-old girls sharing the room in the slope here at the Manor School. And the two were thrown together as outcasts, weren't they? So we've got Eliza with her half Indian heritage, who, despite having a massive fortune, was never really going to find a place in society. And Anne with her energy and intellect, not really fitting into a refined girls' school. And these two had barely been out of each other's company for 2 years and had pledged to be husband and wife, when out of the blue they are separated. We don't know for sure the reason, but Anne was asked to leave and only return once Eliza had finished her education. So we can assume that their relationship was discovered. But from then on, apart from meetings during the school holidays, they communicate by letter and send gifts to each other. And these gifts quite often include music. And one that Anne mentioned sending Eliza is called Absence. Now, she doesn't list a composer and it isn't in the collection, but I've tracked down what I think the piece is. It's by a composer called Pinto and was written in that year. And it's the most excruciatingly beautiful piece, all about longing and separation. And it epitomizes what I imagine Anne is feeling at the time. You look at just some of the words there: being removed from the person that you love, and let me die. And when we think of Anne, when I think of Anne anyway, I think words. Words are her sanity and her friend, aren't they? It seems to me only natural that so many of the pieces in the collection are songs. And just look at some of the titles. I've only got 3 there, but they include things such as a favourite song from The Heiress. Is that Eliza, perhaps? The Brunette. Is that Anne? Friend of My Heart, The Secret, When Pensive I Thought of My Love. And some made me smile because they've got prophetic titles like favourite songs from The Mountaineers and The Travellers in Switzerland. So that's brilliant. But many are clearly about the relationship that she is in. And we know Eliza often refers to Anne as husband, and there are quite a number of songs where a male lover sings to his beloved. And one that I think is particularly interesting is called Antonio's Favourite Song, which is from Richard Coeur de Lion, which is a famous French comic opera. And this is interesting, I think, because the role of Antonio is traditionally taken by a woman. It's a breeches role. And in this song, Antonio sings about his lover, and Anne makes it even more personal to her by writing a different ending. I don't know, you can just see there in the example her pencil markings, and she's written a different music at the end, and the words "take, oh take me to you." So again, it's about longing and being together again. So there is a likelihood that Anne sang all of these songs. And for the music itself, I can tell you she had a high soprano voice. So perhaps try to imagine Anne singing as I share with you a recording that we've made of one of the songs in book 2 called Ma Chère Amie. And again, really listen closely to the words, because it's almost as if this piece was written for Eliza and Anne. One particular bit: under sweet friendship's sacred name, my bosom caught the tender flame. May friendship in thy bosom be converted into love for me. Well, it was, wasn't it? And together raised, together grown, oh, let us now unite in one, as they did. So let's have a listen to that song. So let's go back to thinking about my Spotify analogy just for a minute. It's natural to assume that because this collection dates from the early 1800s, all the music is going to be pigeonholed as classical, but it really isn't. Although there are clearly a number of pieces that could be considered high art from composers like Handel and Mozart, a large proportion isn't, and they're by popular composers of the time, which most of us would not have heard of now, like Mazzini and Colizzi. And they fall into categories that you would recognise. There's folk music. We've got tunes from Scotland, Ireland and Wales, ballads, love songs, the pop songs of the day, songs from the shows, and there are a huge number of these. And there's also a section I'd perhaps label as indie or military, including anonymous pieces written for the Halifax Volunteer Corps by a lady, but that's a whole other story, and music by local composers. But what there isn't is flute music, apart from one sonata and a few bits of optional accompaniment. Now, although Anne famously played the flute, there's no mention of her learning until about 1816, but it does become her favourite choice then. But I want to point out the significance of this, because if there's a question mark about Anne pursuing the fairly feminine pastime of music, she blows everything out of the water by choosing the flute. It's absolutely not a suitable instrument for a girl or a woman at the time. You were supposed to choose something that showed off your elegant posture, like the piano or the harp. And in playing the flute, you had to contort your face and you had to contend with the phallic connotations. I've got a little excerpt there from one of the conduct books of the sort of 1700s, saying that the oboe, for example, is very manlike and indecent in a woman's mouth, and that the flute is improper. And it takes away your digestive juices, apparently. We know Anne's father played the flute, so perhaps she just picked it up one day and enjoyed it. But what I love is that in true Anne's style, she seems to do it because she wants to, and she ignores convention. So in regard to the flute, I just wanted to correct what I think is a misinterpretation. It's been said that Anne taught the flute to Miss Alexander, but I don't believe that was the case. In her journals, she refers to their lessons being curtailed due to Mr. Stopford tuning the instrument. Well, Mr. Stopford was specifically a keyboardist. He was organist in Halifax. And anyway, flutes were not tuned, especially not by a man who came to your house. So it's safe to assume, I think, that it was the piano that Anne taught to Miss Alexander. Now, this began in 1808 after the 2 volumes that I've been studying. But immediately I read that Anne was giving daily music lessons, my suspicions arose. And I imagined her perhaps using music to seduce now. There are 6 piano duets in the collection, and they would have been an ideal excuse to promote physical closeness, just one step away from Miss Alexander sitting on her knee. Now I'm aware of time, so let's finish just by thinking about what these books represent. Obviously musical taste, anyone familiar with Spotify know that at the end of the year you get a summary of your mood depending on the tracks that you listen to. And the books give an insight into that. But as a musician, I can see that Anne was a sucker for a beautiful melody. She was a huge romantic. She loved dramatic, rich harmony. She liked to dance and was patriotic. And the collection confirms things we already know, I think, that she was hugely talented, optimistic, meticulous, and never did anything by halves, as you'll see from all the copious notes across the scores. But I've only had time to touch on these ideas today. But during Anne Lister's birthday week next year, I've been invited to put on 2 events. Sorry, that's the right slide. To expand on these insights. The first is an evening of music. It's going to be costumed with my piano at Shibden Hall on Anne's birthday. So that's going to be spine tingling for me. And the second is a more in-depth talk at Bankfield Museum on the following day, also with some performances. So I hope I've sort of just whetted your appetites for finding out a bit more about the music and what it tells us, and that you'll come along and say hello in person. Just a quick thank you to all sorts of people. Any project, as I'm sure a lot of you know, is hard to do on your own. There is a sea of people helping, not only the funding that I've received, but Richard McFarlane for his support and vision, the archives, the permissions I've had for using the music, the Dr. Janice Brooks, who originally digitised the music, and all the people who've helped with the video. And if you do want to follow the project and you can't come next year, then please do. I've got a website. Drop me any questions that I haven't answered today. There is a YouTube channel where you can see the videos when they're completed, and also a Facebook page where I'll share some of the findings as I go. So thank you for that. And let's see, I think we might have some questions. Do we have some questions? Let me just have a look in the chat. Lots of comments. Yes, so the links are in the chat there. Thank you for putting that in. Thank you. You seem to have enjoyed it. That's brilliant. Any questions? Please do put them in. Lots of people hoping to attend in April. That's fantastic. Please come and say hello to me and introduce yourself. Totally new aspect to Anne's life. Yes, I hope you see it as that. Oh, here we are. Yes, this is interesting. Once she started traveling a lot, I wonder what impact that had on her playing an instrument. I mean, I'd expect she'd encounter piano in most places she visited, but probably was not bringing her flute anywhere. Yeah, that's interesting. The focus of my work has been on these books, but I have been looking at a wider context. I don't know whether she took her flute traveling with her. I'm presuming not. There was a period where she would practice and perform sort of around dinner time every day, so at Shibden, but I haven't heard or found any reference to her playing it on her travels. There are mentions of people playing the piano, not her, but people that she's with playing the piano at various places on her travels in Paris and so on. But yeah, learning the piano, you have to rely on an instrument being wherever you're going. And often there would be one. We're moving later into the Victorian period where every parlour had a piano. So yes, I believe a lot of people that she knew played as well. In fact, I came across a diary from somebody else called Miss Eubank, who went to a musical evening at the Belcombs. So we see Mariana playing and singing and what have you. So that's another area that I want to be looking at. But thank you for that question. That's an interesting one. Was Anne Lister ever gifted any music books later in life, or did she connect with anyone over music? Now, this is the tantalising thing, because we only have the 2 books that I've been looking at. We know a lot was sold off from Shibden Hall, so the question is, where's all the flute music? That's not there, so there must be other volumes somewhere that somebody might come across at some point. I don't know that she would be gifted books, but certainly, as I say, between herself and Eliza, they would exchange music as gifts, and music that epitomised what they were feeling at the time. I've come to the conclusion that perhaps Anne's music endeavours were mainly her younger life, and that she probably saw it as part of her proper education, regardless of being a woman or a man. There certainly was that at the manor school, they would have had lessons in music. And as I was saying, it's part of being accomplished that girls were expected to. But she was playing long after she left the school. And the flute, as I say, was taken up against convention long after leaving school. And she did play that throughout her life. So I don't think it was particularly restricted to her younger days. But I think these intense years of 1806 and 1807 are captured in the 2 books that we're looking at. Anything else? Have I found anything unexpected in the sheet music annotations? No, only the pieces of Bracken they were unexpected. Translations of Latin, that's expected. She corrected some spelling mistakes. Often printing was a bit haphazard then, so I saw her correcting spellings in a couple of places. I think the unexpected thing for me was to find quite a big crossover between her collection and the Austen collection. Are they very different people? I don't know, that's something to think about, but there are at least 5 pieces that appear in both collections, and I really wasn't expecting that. But I think it tells us a lot about the spread of music around the country and what was popular at the time, what was everybody listening to. So that was a surprise to me. Are the notes for the pieces Anne Lister played available somewhere? Unfortunately, they're not. I've had permission to use them. Perhaps that's something in the future. I know they were talking earlier about open access to sources. Just as the entire Austen collection has been digitised, I really would love for the Anne Lister collection to be open access too. So yeah, I would hope that was something that would come up in the future. How are we doing for time? Are we okay, Marlena?
We're actually at time, Lisa, so
let's
wrap up.
Okay. Thank you so much for engaging anyway, everybody.